Hey readers, we are here today to read the next couple of chapters in Pax Journey Home for our virtual day. So let's get started. So we're starting with chapter 17, which is Pax. If you recall from the last time we read from Pax's point of view, he was looking for a way back home with his kit that had left home following him, and they were kind of trapped from some fires that were getting set, like they needed a new path to get home. And so the last time we left them, he and his daughter fell asleep in a small cave waiting for morning, and he said he was going to take her to get a drink. So here's chapter 17. The kit awoke at midday. She nuzzled sleepily into Pax's chest, and he knew she was seeking her mother's care. He licked her all over gently, as he had seen Bristle do. After her fur was clean of the dust and grit from their scramble down the cliff, he began on her paws. The little pads were all torn up. She allowed him to pick out shale and flint shards without a whimper, but she flinched each time, and Pax was distressed that he was causing her pain. When he finished, fresh blood seeped from all four paws. She pulled them in to lick them herself, and Pax could see that her tongue was dry. For that, at least, he could provide relief. I will carry you to a pond to drink. He eased his jaw around his daughter's neck, but she squirmed free and limped a few steps away from him. Pax followed. No, you would leave a blood trail. Predators seek the young, and especially the injured. He picked her up, and this time she did not struggle. He darted across the dried brush to the pond with his daughter jouncing against his chest. He walked into the shallows, surprised again to notice that no quick minnows glittered, no frogs scissored off and set her down. The water will soothe your paws. Obedient now, the kit stood knee-deep in the water as she drank and drank. When her belly was taut, Pax carried her to the only greenery he saw, a bed of half-dead juniper. It would make a good temporary refuge. Here there were no predators, water to drink only a few steps away. And then he saw another benefit to the place. Here you will learn to swim. All right, otters, that was a pretty short chapter. So we are going to read chapter 18 as well, which is, of course, back to Peter's point of view. And if you recall from the last time we read from Peter's point of view, he had been traveling with Samuel and Jade, and he learned about the pond, which it seems like Pax and his daughter are at. He learned about the pond where metals had been deposited. And he learned that he and Samuel are pretty different in that Samuel has also lost a lot of people that he loves, but Samuel was looking for someone to kind of fill that space, whereas Peter wants to be left alone so he can't feel hurt anymore. And that's kind of where we ended off. So here's our next Peter chapter, chapter 18. The day was hot, more like July than mid-May, and the terrain was marshy. Peter had drawn sediment duty, and he was slogging along the bank, muddy pant legs chafing his shins, when Jade came up beside him, reached up to unpin her hair, and handed him 2 clips. Roll up your cuffs. Clip them. Oh, thanks. But Peter nodded toward the fallen tangle of her hair, already sticking to her neck. She shrugged and snapped off a stem from the shad bush beside her. She broke it in 2, twisted her hair up into a mound, and speared it through with the twigs. Then she sauntered away to a stand of willows and disappeared into them, waving away mosquitoes. Peter picked up a fresh sample kit and climbed down the bank to where Samuel was jarring water. Samuel straightened up and made a stabbing motion to his heart. Right? What? Peter asked. Kindness. Her hair clips. He raised a glance back to Jade, kneeling in the reeds. It's like her secret weapon. I still get ambushed. Secret weapon? I mean, you don't see it coming. Surprise attack. Or maybe that's just me. Maybe the way I grew up, I never expect it. But you'll be hurting about something or needing something, and she'll say or do this kind thing, and it just slays you. Peter nodded and unzipped the kit. Secret weapon. I get it. Except it heals instead of hurts. Samuel stabbed a thumb at his heart again, smiling this time, and then bent to his work. Later, when Jade and Samuel were sterilizing the day's equipment at the camp table, Peter sat at the bank with his bare feet in the cool water. Holding Jade's clips, he thought again about Samuel's comment that her kindness was like a secret weapon. Samuel had only meant the stealth of it, not the weapon part. But the strange thing was, lately, whenever anyone had done something kind for him, Vola offering him a home or suggesting his grandfather might move in, he had felt wounded, or at least felt at risk that a wound might be coming, which wasn't fair. He knew that. Vola hadn't been trying to hurt him. Jade certainly hadn't when she'd given him those clips. She'd just been her generous self. It suddenly occurred to him that he hadn't even thanked her. Ashamed, Peter put his boots on again and walked back upstream to where he'd seen a camphor tree. With his jackknife, he hacked off a pencil-thick stem. He cut 2 6-inch lengths, stripped the bark from them, and then whittled the wood smooth, taking care to round the ends. He found Jade on the bank near where Samuel was knee-deep in the river. Both of them were frowning down at a rock. Jade waved and Peter walked over to join her. Thank you for the clips today. He held out his gift. Here, for your hair. They're beautiful. Thank you. Jade pulled the twigs out of her bun and then refastened it with the polished sticks, smiling. Peter felt forgiven. They're camphor wood, he added. It's what mothballs are made of, so they'll keep the mosquitoes away too. Suddenly, Jade pointed at something in the water, and Samuel lunged. What are you doing? Couple of bog turtles here, Samuel grunted. Too fast for me. They're endangered, Jade explained. We thought if we could catch one, we could draw a blood specimen, see how they're faring. But they're skittish. We can't get near. Well, I know how to catch one, Peter offered. Be right back. A few yards into the scrub, he located a young black cherry and sawed off a slim branch with his jackknife. He snapped off the side shoots until he had a bare Y on a 6-foot length. He bent the 2 arms of the Y until they met, and then wove them back around into a ring about a foot across. Then he stripped off a bunch of slender new shoots from the base of the tree. These he wove across the ring until he had a rough net. He brought it over. Jade broke into a grin and waded out with the net. A minute later, when Samuel pointed, she dipped the net and scooped up a turtle. She flipped it belly up and talked to it in a soothing voice while Samuel pulled out a hypodermic needle and drew a vial of blood. Then Jade set the turtle back into the river, feet pinwheeling, with a little farewell pat to its shell. She straightened up and bowed her head at Peter. Peter had to hide a little smile of pride. It was nothing. In the spring, wild cherry branches are really pliable. Samuel went up to the camp table to file the specimen. Jade sat on the bank and patted a space beside her for Peter to sit. "You know a lot about trees," she observed. Peter leaned back on his elbows. "Trees are amazing. You know they communicate with each other?" "Really? Like humans?" "Better, actually." "Better? How?" Peter almost said, "They don't have to touch," but he knew how that would sound. "It's better because they don't have to do it directly, tree to tree. That's slow and inefficient. With trees, it's more like a chemical telepathy." Samuel came down and sat on Peter's other side. "Chemical telepathy?" He raised an eyebrow. "Really, like in the savannah when giraffes start eating an acacia tree? That tree sends out a message underground through fungus threads. Sometimes fungi are a mile long. And all the acacia trees in the neighborhood shoot out a bitter chemical into their leaves, so the giraffe leaves them alone. Or, if a tree is in distress, it sends out the message, 'Hey, I need help here,' and the other trees send over some sugar or whatever it needs." "That's amazing." Jade tipped her head back, gazing at the leafy canopy. "A whole community above us, talking to each other underneath us, in a language we can't hear. I think humans would evolve to do it if we could. If I were a tree, I could just think, 'Hey, I need help,' and anyone in the area would get the message and send whatever I needed." Samuel pointed to the net at Peter's feet. "How do you know how to make that? And do that thing with the birches and know about camphor repelling bugs?" "Oh, those things I learned from my..." Peter never knew how to refer to Vola. Guardian? Friend? Not family, but pretty close to it. Too close. "This person I've been staying with." Jade cocked her head. "You don't live with your family?" Peter suddenly felt trapped, Samuel on one side of him, Jade on the other. Here, in the space between this couple who loved each other, he didn't feel safe. He got up. He made a show of resting the net against a tree before he answered, "Well, my parents are both gone. And my grandfather, he's not able." Jade got to her feet. "What do you mean your parents are gone?" she asked. Her voice was low and soft the way it had been when she was soothing the turtle. "Oh no, Peter. Not dead." Samuel got up then too. Peter stuffed his hands into his pockets. "My mom when I was 7, my dad in October." He turned his gaze to the forest across the river because he knew the expression that would be on both of their faces. Every person he'd told at his new school had worn it every time, and he hated that expression. A mixture of horror and sorrow that made him remember that what had happened was awful and sad, and he didn't need to be reminded of that. His hand clenched hard around the jackknife in his pocket. "This past October, Peter?" Jade asked even more quietly. "Just a few months ago?" He nodded, but still didn't look at her. "He was in the war. People die in wars." He pulled his jackknife from his pocket, rolled it across his palm. "I could cut some twine, make a real net. I bet there are fish. Fish for dinner." "You're shaking," Samuel said. Peter looked down at the jackknife. It was trembling. Or no, it was his hand trembling. His arm. Actually, his whole body, his legs, everything seemed to be vibrating, as if a new, dangerous current were passing through him. Jade took a step closer. I think you're saying, "Hey, I need help here." Peter looked up sharply to see if she was messing with him. Jade gave him an encouraging smile. She wasn't messing with him. And then she opened her arms, just as if that was a reasonable thing to do. Time stopped. The last person who had hugged Peter had been his father, a year ago, that last day at the mill right after Peter had let Pax go and he'd gone back down the hill to say goodbye. A week later, when he'd made it back to Vola's and asked if he could live with her and had to say the words, "It will be without my fox," she had tried. He'd knocked her arms away. His grandfather? Well, his grandfather never attempted, not even when they'd gotten the news that Peter's dad had died. It seemed as if the old man's shoulders were rusted and his arms couldn't rise into an embrace. Peter realized he wasn't breathing. His throat seemed to have swollen shut. He dragged in air, nostrils flared wide, and the air helped, but it didn't stop the shaking. "I'll get that twine," he said, and even his voice was shaking. He stuffed his jackknife back in his pocket and started for the gearbox. He really meant to go there, but halfway there, his legs disobeyed. Peter turned back. He crossed the distance between him and the couple who loved each other. He felt their arms wrap into the space between them. And that was all right, because probably it made them feel better, and besides, he would leave them after the project at the mill to go live alone. And really, how much damage could be done in a few weeks? For another moment, he shook inside that space where they held him, and then he didn't shake. All right, readers, so that is where we will end for today. Make sure that when you go back into Canvas, there are 2 questions to answer, one for the chapter about Pax and one for the chapter about Peter. You have 2 choices for answering those questions. You can either type in your response, but make sure you answer both questions completely, or you can voice record your answer to both questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me and send a Canvas message. Otherwise, I look forward to discussing these chapters with you on Tuesday and reading the next couple chapters in Pax. Have a great rest of your day.